Hi everyone, Savannah here, and today we're drawing this adorable pup in a pumpkin. Everything you need to follow along is linked in the description down below. That includes the color palette, the free brushes, and the template that I used in this video. Let's go ahead and jump right in. First, we're changing that background, so click into layer, select background color, and in the Pumpkin Puppy color palette, we're going to select this grayish color. Now, on a new layer, we're going to add some of this grayish blue color. I didn't do this on new layer on accident, so don't do what I do here. Go into layers, click that plus, and we're going to add a new layer below the outline layer, so just drag it below and just start adding in some of that light blue, again, using that square blend brush for this section. And this is a pressure sensitive brush, so the harder you press, the more that pigment of the color you have selected is going to show. The lighter you press, the more it's going to blend in with that color that's already there. So I'm just alternating between that blue and that gray color just to kind of blend this background out, but I'm not going too crazy with it. Now on a new layer, we're going to be working on the ground layer. So we're going to grab this kind of yellowish orange color. We're going to put that along the bottom. I'm still using the square blend brush because I want a little bit of that blue to kind of poke through, but then I'm going to grab the lighter yellowish white color right next to it and just lighten it up right around where the pumpkin's going to be. And I turn the outline layer off from time to time just to see if I need to add color in certain areas, so it looked a little bit too light for me. So I'm going to grab that darker yellow color and pull that color down. And then once that's done, I'm going to add a new layer and we're going to work on the pumpkin. So grab that brown color, the darker brown color from the color palette, the circle brush, and we're going to just do the front side of the pumpkin here. We're going to do these on two layers. So the front of the pumpkin here, we're going to do on one layer, and then we'll create a layer below it for the inside of the pumpkin. It'll just be a little bit easier as we're adding in some shading to have those on two separate layers. You can definitely do them on the same layer if you want to, but I prefer just to do this on two layers because it'll just make it a little bit faster, a little bit easier when we're adding in detail work. And you may have noticed that I turned the opacity down on the outline layer just so that I can see the shape of the pumpkin as I'm filling it in. You can also toggle that outline layer off if you don't want the lines so that you can just see how the pumpkin's looking if you need to tweak anything in those sections before we start adding details. And now we're just going to fill it in with this orange color. We will add details like I mentioned. We'll lighten up some of the areas, darken some of the other areas, but let's just go ahead and fill it in with this solid color. Again, check to see if the shape looks how you want it to look for this pumpkin before we move on. Now I'm happy with that shape, so I'm just going to go ahead and alpha lock that right now. And then above that ground layer, we're going to create a new layer, and this is going to be the inside of the pumpkin. So I'm just grabbing the lightest orange color that I have for this pumpkin. You can use any color. I just like using a contrasting color to what we just laid down so I can see exactly where the two lines are differed. So I can see this is the front of the pumpkin, this is the inside. But again, you can use whichever color you want. I just picked that lighter orange color. And now on the pumpkin layer, not the inside, but the exterior here, I grabbed that circle blend brush and that medium orange color. And now we're just going to use that blend brush to lighten up certain areas. So again, the blend brushes, the square and the circle, are both pressure sensitive. So you'll see I'm adding in some softer lines here on the right side and then pressing a little bit harder as I go left because I'm having that light source for this drawing come in from the left, and you'll see in that reference image in the bottom, the image looks much brighter on the left than it does to the right. So I'm trying to be mindful of that as I'm filling in this pumpkin. So I want to do lighter colors and heavier presses with these lighter colors on the left side, and then alternatively on the right, we'll go a little bit darker. So again, pressure sensitive brush, the harder you press, the more that pigment that you have selected is going to pull in. And now I am pulling in more of that yellowish orange color that we used for the inside of the pumpkin here because again, the left side could be brighter, so I want to brighten that side up. And I'm not going to add any of this yellowy orange color to the right side because it's not going to be in the light. And so I'm just adding it to the left in this middle section here. And then I'm going over with that medium orange to just kind of soften those colors a little bit. And then I'll grab in some of this darker orange color on the right to darken the right side and add a little bit more shadows on this pumpkin. And I'm going to use that dark brown orange color to darken in the inner parts here of the pumpkin. So if you think of the pumpkin shape, it kind of has these bulbous kind of areas coming out the edge. And so I'm just adding a little bit of dark into the corners to make it look like it has those areas like a pumpkin actually does. Now we are also going to set that inner part of the pumpkin to alpha lock, and we're just going to grab that medium orange brown color and just add a little bit of interest. You can still use that circle blend brush. I didn't do too much detail here because it's just the inside. You're going to have the puppy kind of overlapping it a little bit, and so I just add a little bit of interest so it's not just a bright yellow spot there. And now we're going to work on the puppy. So I'm just going to deciding which color I want to start here. I end up using that dark brown color, but regardless, you'll want to use the circle brush for this and create a new layer. This layer can be above all the other layers that we have, but still below the outline so you can see the shape of it. But I'm going to use that dark brown color, trace the shape of the puppy, and then we'll start adding in some details and some hair and things like that to the dog to make it look more like a puppy. And if you want to, you can turn the outline layer off, but I have a good enough visual of how this is going to look. Plus, we're adding hair that's going to go over the edge of the puppy, and so I'm not too worried about the edge on this particular shape, but usually I do turn that outline layer off to make sure the shape looks okay before I move on, but I'm good with this, so I'm going to start filling it in with this dark brown color. And I really had fun deciding the theme for October. I love Halloween. I love just doing fun, cutesy Halloween and spooky Halloween. And so we'll have a little bit of that in this month for the Halloween drawings. But I really like this puppy and a pumpkin. I love dogs. I have a dog myself. And so I wanted to kind of incorporate that. My dog doesn't look anything like this, but he's an Aussie. But I just love puppies. So I wanted to do a puppy related image. Now that we have the puppy outlined and filled in, let's just go ahead and add the eyes. So this is also on a new layer. I grabbed that dark black color. It's almost black, it's not fully black, but it's close enough to black. I'm just going to trace the eye and fill that in, and then we'll also do the nose as well. So let's go ahead and add those details in, and then we can start building up the different colorings on this puppy. We can start adding in the finer details to this puppy and get closer to being done. And don't worry about how this is looking right now. We're going to add hairs over the eye area and the nose here. It will, especially as we start adding in hairs to the body, it will look a little off, but don't worry, we'll add a layer where we add a little bit of hairs that go over the nose a little bit, over the eyes a little bit, just to make them look like they blended more with the dog's face. And I'm going to turn the outline layer off just so I can take a look and make sure that the shape is looking how I want it to look before I move on to the next steps. And now let's go ahead and add the hair to the dog here. So on that dog layer, I'm going to grab that medium brown color and I'm going to use a circle blend brush for this. Now, as you're adding in these hairs, you do want to follow the natural way that hair would fall on a dog. So just follow that shape and you can follow how I do it here if you don't have a dog. Or if you do, just look at your dog. You can see how, which direction the hair falls. But you don't want to do these brush strokes all in different directions because that's not going to look natural. So you're just going to follow for instance, I'm working on the ear, so I'm just following the shape of the ear here and adding in this lighter color. Now I also use that dark brown color, which I typically like to use darker brown colors or darker colors when I'm doing animals, mainly because it kind of pulls through um, a little bit better and kind of gives you the shadows much easier if you do it that way. If you didn't do that way, I know I mentioned earlier you could pick whichever color you wanted for the dog. That's absolutely fine. You just kind of do that in reverse. So if you went too bright, you can start adding in those shadows and they'll still have that brightness kind of popping through. And then you will go over it with all the colors again anyway. So you'll see that I am adding the lighter colors. I'll pull in darker colors to bring those tones down even further. But it's just a lot of building up the hair layers. Now, the reason we don't have it on alpha lock is so that we can have the hairs going over the edge because again, you don't want a straight line. You want it to look more natural. So that's why we don't have this layer set to alpha lock yet. Once you go around the edge and add the hairs and give that impression that there's hairs kind of sticking out around the edges, then you can set to alpha lock and start adding in the details. And you might want to be turning that outline layer off from time to time as you're adding in the hairs, just so that you can see if you're going over the areas that you did of that brown layer, whatever layer you decide to use for the edging, just to make sure that it's looking good, like it's hair kind of hanging off the edge of the ears or the paws or whatever area you're working on. And I'm just going to keep pulling in various different colors. So again, my light source is coming from the left. So I'm going to go much lighter on the left side of the puppy here and then darker on the right side. Again, the image in the bottom left shows you kind of how I do it. But I'm going to go lighter on the left side here, just building up the colors. If you wanted to just go around all the edges and add the hair in first, you can definitely do that. I just kind of working as I go along with this puppy, and then once I get all the edging with the hair, then I'll set it to alpha lock. But for now, I'm just kind of adding in colors as I go versus just going around the edge and adding in the hairs. And you don't have to copy the exact colors that I'm using. I added quite a few different colors in the image that you're able to use as you're filling it in. I don't think I used all of the colors, but you can definitely use all of them if you want or pick and choose which colors you want. So I'm just kind of doing this gray tone on the right side. I will darken it a little bit more with the brown, but I'm just trying to give it some color variation for this dog because a lot of dogs, have a lot of different colors. And so I wanted to show the uniqueness of this dog by adding in a lot of these different colors, different undertones as I'm building it up. And then I grabbed this yellowy orange color I'm now starting to do the remainder of the edges that I don't have work because there's not that many I have left. So I'm just using this color to add the edging, but it won't necessarily be the color that I use for the final image. It's very easy to go over all these colors if you don't like something, if it's a little too light for your liking, you can go over it with some darker colors, but it's very easy to go over in different layers. And now that all the edges have that fur-like texture, I'm going to set it to alpha lock and now start adding in a lot of the colors on this inner area. So again, I'm trying to follow the shape of the dog. So the nose, kind of having the hairs go down towards the nose there in a vertical direction and then kind of curving around the sides of the nose where the snout is. And so again, just be mindful of how the hair falls on the dog. We're just going to follow that along the rest of this area here, and then we'll build up the different colors. We'll add in some more highlights, we'll add in some more shadows to really add dimension to this dog. And don't worry if your dog is looking a little off. As you add in more layers and build in more colors into the dog, it's going to look a lot more natural. So again, it's going to look a little bit off right now, but that's because you're probably just adding one color for now. As we build up those layers with these different colors, it will start looking more natural, more like a dog. And I'm not doing really long brush strokes here. I'm keeping the brush strokes pretty short because, again, it's hair. So I don't want really long hair unless you're doing a long haired dog, which is absolutely fine. You can completely change the dog if you don't want to use this outline. Maybe you want to put your own dog into the image. But I'm using just short brush strokes here for the hair on the dog. But again, if you're doing a long haired dog, you can go a little bit longer with those brush strokes. But you don't need to go too long if you're going to follow along with what I'm doing here. And now it's just a lot of building up the colors. Grab a bunch of those different colors from the color palette, add it in places where you want more of the highlights, maybe those midtones, and just keep building up the layers. If you've gone over that layer several times, that's okay because every time you add in a new layer with a different color or even the same color, it changes the look of that hair and that texture. And so that's why I spent quite a bit of time on the hair, and that's why I go over a lot of the areas multiple times because every time you add a new color or you build up a layer, it changes the look and makes it look a little bit more natural, like an actual dog. And I'm gonna grab some of this brown and go back over the paws here because it kind of, I went a little too heavy with the light color, so I lost a lot of that brown. So a lot of this again is just gonna be going over the layers, adding in some darker tones, adding in some lighter tones depending on what you need in that area. It's very easy to go too heavy-handed in one direction or the other. So that's why we build up a lot for these layers. It also, again, just gives it a lot more character, a lot more of a realistic look because they're complex hairs, right? Dogs have a lot of coloring, and so there's going to be a lot of coloring in the object or the shape here that we're doing. And so that's what we're kind of trying to emulate is the actual look of fur on a dog. And again, don't worry about the eyes and the nose and mouth here. If it's still looking unnatural, we're going to add hairs over top of it to kind of blend it in a little bit more. So don't worry too much about it. Just work on adding in the hair texture that you want around everywhere else. And then same thing on the right side of the face here. I went a little too light. I want to darken it a little bit because that's going to be in the shadow from where the light's coming. And so I'm just going to darken it a little bit with the brown. I'm not pressing too hard down on the brush here or the pencil here because I want it to kind of blend a little bit nicer. So in some areas I am pressing a little harder, but for the most part I'm just lightly adding in that dark brown color, and then I'll grab in this mid-tone brown just to blend it out a little bit more. Now I'm going to go in with this light, almost white color here and start adding some more highlights to the left side of the dog here. I'll add a little bit to the ear to the right because it's kind of sticking up a little bit more, and so that light's going to be hitting it. But I'm going to add a lot of this light color to the left side of the dog here, not over the entire surface, more towards the edges or where that surface is more in the light than other areas. So just be mindful of that as you're placing this color, but I'm just doing it in certain spots here and there that would be in the light that's shining on the side of the dog here. And now this midsection here is a little too light for me, so I'm going to grab that brown and with a soft touch, I'm going to darken it just a little bit here because again, it's a little too bright for me. I want a little bit more depth to it by adding in this dark brown. So I'm just going to go in with a very light touch here and blend in some darker shades. And then I'm going to take that up and over the eye as well to the right because it could be a little bit of shadow there, and also gives a little bit more of definition on the eye so you know that it's clearly kind of the eyelid for that right eye. And then I added a little bit of shadow on the left. I will blend this out so it's not as dark because it looks very dark here. So I'll blend it out with a little bit of lighter shades, but I did want to add a little bit of shadow from that eye on the left as well. Now let's go ahead and add some definition to the eyes and the nose. So make sure you set that layer to alpha lock. I'm grabbing the brown color and with the circle blend brush, I'm just going to add a little bit of brown to the inner part and then also on the nose as well. I just want to add a little bit of that definition, and then I'm grabbing this gray color. It's a grayish green color is what it's called. I'm just adding some highlights to the nose to make it look a little bit more shiny because their noses are usually wet. And then the same thing to the eye. I'm just going to add a little bit of that to the eye because there's going to be reflectiveness in the eye. So once you have that down, grab that light grayish yellow color and add a few spots here and there on the eye to really show that this is reflective on the eyes. And now we want to add that hair over the eyes a little bit. And so on a new layer right above the eye and nose layer, we're going to, still using that circle blend brush, grab a shade that's closer to what you have that fur hair around the eye is. And we're just going to very lightly go around the eye, following the shape of the eye hair with that brush. It's just going to make it look like it's blended in a little bit more. You don't want to go too crazy with it because you don't want hair right over the eye, but you want enough that it looks like there's hair butting up right against that eyelid there. And so that's what I'm doing here, just adding a little bit to make it blend more because it's very stark how it's looking right now. It looks a little too unnatural for my liking. So I'm just going to do this to give it more hair-like texture. And on the eye on the right side, you can go a little bit darker because we use darker tones there. But again, just follow the shape of the eye with this circle blend brush, and that's going to give it that hair-like texture that we are looking for. And now before we jump to the nose and mouth area, I'm going to actually do the inner ear. So I'm going to grab that darker brownish orange color and I'm just going to add that into the inner ear. Now this is still on that same layer that we're doing the hair around the eyes. So I'm trying to be mindful of not going over the shape too much because I still want those hairs to stick out. So I'm kind of doing a very light brush up against the hairs here because I don't want the orange to be over top of that. And I'm just going to fill this in with that orange color, still using that circle blend brush because it doesn't need to be a super stark difference. I still want a little bit of that dark tone that we had originally pulling through, and also because when you go around the edge, I want those hairs to still stick out. Then I'm going to grab that lighter orange color, the orange brown color. I'm just going to add a little bit of variation on the upper part here of the ear, and then grab the even lighter orange and add just a smidgen more. So just a gradual tone change in that under ear part. And now I do go over the hair with the color that we used on the layer below. So just to blend it out even further. So I'm just going to go over, plus I think the hair wasn't going over the ear enough for my liking. So I'm just going to tweak this section here, modify a little bit, add more of the hairs there, blend it out, and then we can work on the nose and the mouth. And now that's looking better. So let's go ahead and go to the nose. Same technique that we used for the eyes. We're just adding a little bit of the hair right up against the nose here. If you notice your dog, of course, their hair goes up close to their nose. So we just want to look a little bit more natural and not look so stark up against the hair here. And I'm going to do the same thing with the mouth as well, just to blend it in even further because it's looking a little too stark. And I did take this color up a little bit more on the top of the head. A lot of this kind of adding these final colors is just fine tuning the image. Now you could stop at any point if it looks good to you. I just tend to go a little bit further than what maybe I should. That's just my personal preference. I tend to be more of a perfectionist, so I keep going over sections when maybe I don't need to necessarily go over sections. But if you are good with how yours is looking, you can move on. We're going to add some shadows underneath the puppy here around the pumpkin and then underneath the actual pumpkin as well. And again, a lot of this is just fine tuning. So I'm just going to go over, see if there's areas where I need to darken, see if there's areas I need to lighten before I move on to the shadow area. So again, if you have already gotten your puppy the way you want it to look, you can definitely skip this and go to that next step. I'm just going to fine tune and tweak a few sections here and there before moving on. Okay, now let's go ahead and add the shadow on the pumpkin. So typically in my videos, I do these on separate layers right above the layer I'm looking to add shadow to, but I just did it directly on the pumpkin. There's not too many shadows in this. I just grabbed that darker brown tone color. I'm not worried about, doing blue tones or warm tones or things like that for this. I just wanted to add a little bit of a shadow to this image. So I'm just doing it directly on the pumpkin layer. Still using the circle blend brush, I'm just using that dark brown color and kind of following the shape of that puppy and moving it to the bottom right because again that light source is coming from the top left. Now same thing, I am just doing this directly on the layer on the floor, so I'm also adding a shadow to the pumpkin that's resting on the floor here. So I'm adding in this very dark, almost black color, and I'm going to add that underneath the pumpkin and blend this out with the background or with the ground layer. And again, still using that circle blend brush. So you'll see here I'm pressing harder on the pencil and that gave me a lot more of that pigment of the color that I have selected. And then I kind of softened up that touch and it kind of blended it out further. So blend this area out. If you wanted to, you could, like I do in all my other videos, you could do a new layer right above that ground layer, add in the color that you want to have for the shadow and then do a Gaussian blur on it. You could do a blend mode on it if you want to, but I'm just doing it directly on the layer itself because again, we only have these two objects that we're adding shadows, so it's not too complex or it's not too complex of a shape either, so I'm just doing it directly there. And there we have our drawing. Thank you so much for sketching along with me today. If you enjoyed creating this pumpkin pup, please feel free to like and subscribe to this channel for more whimsical art each week. And also tell me in the comments, what's the cutest costume you've ever seen a pet wear? I'll see everyone in the next video.